very much for the invitation for this great conference. And I have to admit that I am very glad that I have a chance to present to you GDPR. Have you ever heard about GDPR? Great. So I'm very happy that you at least know what these, four letters mean, because I don't want to say that it's going to be the revolution in the data protection in Europe, because we already have the directive from the 95 year and transposed to each legislation in the European Union. But basically the main reason why European institutions just decided to adopt GDPR, I would say, is this statement. I just assigned to each letter, the new word, as we used to know that originally it means General Data Protection Regulation. But I have to say that the main objective of just adopting the GDPR is just giving data proper respect. What GDPR is? GDPR is basically the new harmonized set of regulations and obligations for the companies. And GDPR was adopted in April 2016 and will replace the current directive from '95. And this is the most comprehensive set of rules of the data protection in the world. And one of the main objectives is this picture, because if you look at the pictures, you see the applications that they didn't even exist in '95. So you see the numbers, even they are come from 2016 year. But I would say maybe 2/3 of these applications didn't exist. And through these applications, we are collecting and processing so many personal data. So the main objective of Europe was to basically to adjust the legislation to technological development and to maybe stricter the rules of sharing and processing the personal data. Personal data become the most valuable, the value of all the companies, because we know that the companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others processing millions, maybe billions of the personal data. And why the GDPR just attracts, the currently, anyway, just the businesses, and why they just, why the GDPR creates the emotions, positive or negative, is this picture. Unfortunately, EU just decided to significantly increase the penalties for the breaches of the rules in GDPR. And you can see here the various factors that can influence whether your business, in case that you don't follow the rules, can be imposed. So it's either 10 million euros or 2% of the turnover, or 20 million, even higher penalties, or the 4% in case that we are talking about the multinational companies. Then what will change compared to the current situation, the legal situation? GDPR just is based on a couple of principles, and these are here. You are allowed to process the personal data only in case that you have a proper legal title to process the data. So you have to respect the lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. What is the big challenge? I can see that in my clients' work and with my clients, that the main challenge for the companies would be the principle of the data minimization, which means that you can process only the data you need for your business, for the processing, for just doing the business. But in case that you lose the title, that you don't have any other purpose why you have to process the data, you have to delete them. And you can imagine how can be difficult, especially for your businesses, just to erase the data from all the sources, from all Excel charts, for example. So this is the biggest challenge, especially for the IT world, how to comply with the data minimization. The main subject of GDPR are personal data. So GDPR is just about the personal data. So what is it? It's any information relating to the identified or identifiable natural person. It's all information that is assigned to specific person which you are able to identify. So for example, I say, if you don't know me, if you don't know my name, if you are not able to identify me, for example, shoe size is not personal data. But in case that you were assigned this data to me, and you are able to, with any other information you have about my person, to identify me, then even my shoes size become the personal data. GDPR is about the personal data. It doesn't cover the business data, but I always say that if you start protecting the personal data, you are automatically protect also the business data. So that would be probably the additional, impact of the GDPR. I mean, this the positive one. Personal data is they are any information, and it can be in any form, like in the form of images, text, X-rays, IP address, for example, and this is the scope of the information which is relating to specific identifiable person. We can split the personal data to two groups: general personal data, which are basically name, sex, age and birth date, marital status, citizenship. But we also include like email address, your business email address, your business phone number as a personal data. However, GDPR is more focused on the protection of this kind of group of data, which is the special category. We just call them as a sensitive personal data. And the list of these data comes under this special category, which is the race or ethnic origin, the information about, for example, the politic views. And what is new in GDPR, the genetic and biometric data just are the part of this sensitive data. So in case that you are processing and collecting these kind of data, you are under GDPR regime, and you have to be careful because the protection of this set of data is more restricted. So basically, processing of sensitive data is, according to GDPR, is not allowed unless you fall under one of these processing. So, for example, in case that you are processing the data about your employees, and you obviously need to process also some of the data that follow, under the sensitive data group, it's allowed, and you don't need the express consent of processing these data. Otherwise, you are not able to process this kind of data. This picture is the one of the most important pictures and obligations, I call it, because these 6 legal titles allow you to process personal data. So in case that you are just processing your data, the personal data of your clients or of your employees, you have to always think what is the legal title for processing or collecting the data. whether it's legal obligation or whether it's vital interest of the data subject, or you are the public authorities, for example, that are processing the data in the public interest, or you have a choice to support your processing by the legitimate interest of you as a controller, or in case that you are not able to justify your processing by one of these titles, you always have to ask your clients or your data subject for the consent. Consent is nothing new. We have this legal title for processing, even in these days. But the difference, which is in GDPR, is that the consent has to be freely given and has to be ambiguous. And this is very important, so especially for the companies, if you have your business terms, for example, on the website, you have to always split the consent to your business terms and the consent to processing of the personal data. Unfortunately, during the limited time, I am not able to go into the details, but I am here just around all day, so in case that you would like to discuss anything with me, feel free to reach me. What is processing of the personal data? You can imagine what you are doing, during your business activities. So processing of the data is any operation or set of the operations which can be performed automatically or in a manual way. And the processing is everything, is any activity which is listed on the right side of this picture. It's also a very important picture because it shows you the relationship between the controller and between the processor. You are primarily the entity, you can be also the natural person or the legal person that determines the purpose of the processing of your data. However, you can also include in the processing some your vendors, for example, provider of the cloud, for example, or you have another companies that provide you with some services and they need the data you are processing. So then in this case, they are in the position of the processor, and it's very important to know that there is also special relationship between these two entities as well, according to GDPR. What is very important is also this picture, which is new according to GDPR, that any data breach has to be notified to the regulatory organizations, regulatory authorities in each EU country. And you have a 72 hours. So if you just look at recent cases like with Uber or Equifax and the other companies that basically they inform the authorities just after 1 year, or even during the acquisition of Yahoo by Verizon, it happened after maybe 2 years or even longer when they decided to notify the authorities that there was a data breach. What is very important with the GDPR, that the GDPR doesn't apply to EU companies only, but GDPR has an extended territorial scope, which means in practical way in that any company outside of EU has to be in line and has to be compliant with GDPR in case that the company offer the goods or services or do any profiling or analyzing of the subject data on the internet. So it has a broader exposure to US companies, to Asian companies, for example, in case that they are processing the data of European residents. The other pillar and the other objective, maybe the second main objective why GDPR is here, is just to strengthen our rights. So to give the right to us as a subject data to decide what the companies will, are allowed to do with our data. So we have a new rights which are listed here on this picture, and to each right corresponds the obligation on the side of the companies. What is very important is just to pay attention to profiling. So in case that you do the profiling of your clients, for example, there is a description what is considered as a profiling according to GDPR. And there is a new rule which basically says that profiling will be possible only with the consent of the data subject, except these processing that are listed here. But with the profiling, we have to also take into the consideration that there is a new regulation which is still in the approval process within EU called e-privacy regulation, which will be some kind of special act to GDPR. And the e-privacy will primarily focus on cookies, the cookies from the website. Then the e-privacy will also govern the applications like Facebook, like Messenger, like Viber. And e-privacy also will cover Internet of Things and the default settings of these things, because everything goes back to profiling. And due to the fact that profiling will be mostly allowed only with the consent of us as a data subject, that would be also a very dramatic change in processing of the personal data. These are responsibilities which comes with the GDPR. So each company has to follow these obligations. It depends what kind of data you are processing, collecting, or whether also you are collecting the sensitive data. Then you will have to face the stricter rules. There is also new set of the rules how these supervisory authorities, regulatory authorities will work. So it's another part of the GDPR, and there is just a picture how you can see how GDPR can impact your companies and the processing of the data. So it has a really deep and detailed impact on your business processes, on your documents, on also the IT systems. And that's why I always say that GDPR is not just an IT project, it's not just a legal project, it's really the combination of all these professions, and this is the teamwork. And that's why I'm here, because I love IT. I like to work with the IT people because they are much more straightforward than lawyers sometimes. So for me, as a combination of this team is grateful. So thank you very much for this very helicopter view on GDPR. I usually have a speech for 1.5 hours, but as I said, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.